Hey everybody, back here with the second draft analysis for the NCPL Commander Draft. Today, helping me will be Leo and Sean. Both players have a lot of history and experience in the NCPL draft, so I'm gonna really value their critique here, and hopefully they can give a little bit of a different insight than my own. So today we're on Chris's draft, and I scored his overall team a 36 and a half. What do you guys think? What are your first initial thoughts on Chris's draft?
So I think like we all kind of went to the same place right from the get-go, which is looking down his roster is the speed problem. And it was
Yeah.
the first thing that you pointed out when you were showing us your initial scores, and we kind of all agree with that, where he's not I don't think maybe he'll be the slowest team. That's possible
I think it's
on average.
pretty heavy in his favor to be the slowest team.
Yeah, but the awkward thing about that is that despite being the slowest team, he still doesn't really have like all that cohesive of a potential trick room comp.
Yeah.
And you can make up for that with enough bulk, and he has bulk. Don't get me wrong. Like
Yeah.
the Muck, the Silvali,
The
and
Renarius.
the Runarius are gonna just take hits for days,
Yeah.
which can make up for that lack of speed. But on the same token, when you have all these speed tiers that are in the like 50s, 60s, 70s, but not quite getting lower, not quite getting higher, that's when things can become a little bit difficult to build around. Not that not impossible, just difficult.
Yeah, his speed tier is a little awkward because like you're saying, it's not quite super fast, but again, it's not slow enough to beat Trick Room. But at the same time, he has two Quiver Dancers and he has a speed booster. So it's very strange. And I'm kind of interested to see how he's gonna. John, what do you think?
The problem is, with the speed issue, like you said, Renarius gets Trick Room, so it could build around that. But the problem is, a lot of them are too slow to utilize it properly.
Mm-hmm.
Like for example, even if you go say bulky mill tank, there are plenty of things in this draft right now that are that are slower than that and bulkier, or slower than that and just can take a hit.
Yeah,
Reggie Drago, I will admit, I'm not as familiar with, but I don't believe its speed is useful enough for a Trick Room. And the problem is, even the faster Pokemon he uses, like let's say Magneton, he's gonna need a Scarf for to really outspeed some of the bigger threats.
yeah,
Or he's gonna need a turn step Quiver Dance to get the speed, or a turn step Speed Boost, which he can get, yeah, but it's
yeah,
also difficult to do so.
yeah. Like I'm having a hard time seeing how he's going to get these setup mons set up. You know, he doesn't have like a teleport or really slow U turns. So I'm very interested to see how these Pokemon are actually set up. With that said, though, I did score his offense an 8.5. A lot of that is in the favor of Quiver Dances and Reggie Drago being an absolute cannon with Dragon's Maw effects.
Yeah, what's funny about the Reggie Drago speed tier is that just looking at the roster on paper, you would expect Reggie Drago on most teams to it just like vibes like a Pokemon that's slower, but it's actually his second I'm sorry, third fastest Pokemon,
Mm-hmm.
which is just a little weird. It's not you would
Odd.
expect at first glance. I think all of this like speed manipulation that's kind of going to be required. I think he's going to have to pick up another tool to assist in that speed manipulation. We talked a little bit about the amount of value that a sticky webber could have on this team, and I think that that could be invaluable for him.
Yeah,
Oh,
Um,
definitely.
but like it's going to make Chris's games, I think, some of the more interesting games to watch out of the league in this season, just because he is going to have to be very creative to get the most out of his Pokemon. And he's got a lot of tools to really to facilitate that creativity. Like
yeah,
the Blossom is kind of an interesting support Pokemon with a little bit of extra bulk, so that it ends up being a setup sweeper. Uh, the Quiver, it was the Quiver Dance on the Blossom is the second
yeah, yeah,
user,
What
correct?
yeah.
And
speaking if you guys don't mind for a second, speaking of
absolutely.
Blossom, something interesting about that too is it does get strength sap. So if it can live, say, one physical hit from anything, it can get the opportunity to start setting up. You have to dedicate a whole move slot to it, which is not great, but
Yeah,
it can help open up an opportunity to start setting up and start getting some hits in.
yeah,
But the problem is you need to live that one physical hit, and I'm sure, as you guys know, Blossom is not the bulkiest Pokemon.
Yeah, I mean its defense stats are pretty good, but its HP is very low.
Middling, yeah.
Plus,
And
I
Grant,
think. Oh, you got.
sorry, granted, just real quick, this is a lower tier draft, so that always gives these kind of like more oddball bulk choices a bit of an upper hand, just because one shots are going to be less frequent. Like that's
Yeah.
just going to be a thing that happens without any OU, without any UU, there and without any Z moves. There just aren't that many tools to really break through something with even slightly above average bulk, which I think Blossom has. Not
Yeah.
great bulk, but
I
above
think
average.
I think Bellawesome will do well in this lower tier draft. I mean, a lot of the fire moves could really be middled, and um, as long as Chris plays smart. So like, I think it's the roast berry that halves the fire attacks. I think that would be a really smart option for Chris on Bellawesome if he's wanting Bellawesome to be his first slash winner. Because if he's got Quiver Dance and Strength Sap and the roast berry, he can decide what he needs to do to get that first quiver set up and hopefully get going on this.
Just looking at quickly. Rouse
Yeah.
cures burns. Aka's the super effective fire one.
Okay. Thank you.
Great,
Yeah.
great. Compare. And I think texts like that are probably going to be something that he has to rely on quite a bit, just because, like, at least with regards to Blossom and the fire weakness in particular, he doesn't have reliable resists to that. Like his Frostmoth is meant to be something of a setup sweeper and offensive threat on this team. The Blossom looks like it's meant to be something of an offensive threat on this team,
Yeah.
and without a reliable fire switch in, that could be well.
Well,
Reggie Drago is obviously a reliable fire switch in,
he's
but
got Miltank with thick fat, which I think
that is true.
Miltank is going to be a really cornerstone to his team, staying alive and being able to
Definitely.
does with the ice and fire resistant that Miltank is going to have for Reggie Drago, Frostmoth, and Bellossom, which I think are the three probably most important Pokemon on his team in terms of winning. I think.
Miltank is going to be a Pokemon that people come to fear in these in this draft
Oh,
league. I think
definitely.
Oh yeah.
people are going to get some Whitney flashbacks. It's going to be great.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt.
It's versatile too. It can be a good like
Super.
physical wall. It could be a good special wall.
Oh
It's
yeah.
good at setting self rocks.
And
It's
the
got real strength.
and the thing too is like we were just talking about, it's got base 100 speed. Like
Yeah.
having that on a tank is so annoying because it can, I think it gets yeah, it's bodies. Yeah, so he could body slam you and then paralyze you before you can touch him, and then you get the para hacks. It's just a really annoying Pokemon that I definitely do agree that people are gonna really fear this Pokemon, considering both Shield and Sword.
Plus, super reliable recovery in Milk Drink too.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Super
That's
reliable
actually
recovery.
that's actually a problem I have with his draft. There's very little recovery on his team. Like
Mm,
yeah, he can take hits for days, but
Mm,
Miltank and Blossom are really the only ones that can heal.
yeah,
Runarius inherently the big problem with it is it can't heal. Same with Reggie Drago.
hmm
yeah. Like
Everything else.
with the healing and the speed, I mean, I would have really liked to see one or the other, either a wish support or a sticky Weber, just to give his team that little bit of extra help that I think could make it even better for those setup mons or those bulky mons that don't have reliable recovery like Runarigus, because Runarigus actually does quite a bit of things for his team, but it needs to stay alive.
it does, and we talked a little earlier about the kind of lacking support options that are in here, especially when it comes to getting his speed tiers going, and pointing out Renarius as his Trick Room user.
Yeah,
It is a little awkward having your most promising speed tier for Trick Room users, being Renarigus's base 30, also be the one responsible for setting things up.
yeah,
It can make things a little bit difficult, which is why I ultimately think that it's not really going to have much of a place on his team. But I'm sure that Renarigus is going to find itself to be a really useful support mod in a lot of other ways. Things like Will-O-Wisp, uh, every hazard under the sun,
yeah.
solid, the ghost typing to make up for some of his bigger offensive threats having something of a fighting weakness. Like you're going to want to rely on the Milk Tank, you're going to rely on the Magneton. Having something to reliably switch into those fighting attacks is going to be a big deal. So Renarigus and then Savali Ghost on the other end are going to be
100%.
invaluable on that front.
Oh, definitely.
Another thing quickly before we go on to defense here. Um, this is pertaining to Chris's offense and helping it. A really interesting thing when I was looking up Runarigus is it does get memento.
Yeah.
So a memento lead or saving it until later in the game and getting a memento off into his Bellossom or into his Combuskin, I think could be a really really strong point to his offenses.
Memento could be a really powerful tool when you have such strong setup sweepers on his team, like the Combuskin, like the Blossom, and like the Frostmoth. Quiver Dance is obviously one of the best setup moves you can have.
Yes.
So to have that option to Memento, uh, it's not the most conventional pivoting, but if your whole offense is gonna rely around getting that big sweep off through multiple setups, then you're not really gonna find a better move to do that than Memento. And
Mm,
plus that, with the low speed tier, oftentimes having people hit into the Reneragus and have him pass off the useless ability, that into a memento, you could really have some pretty difficult setups to counter when you're facing Chris's team.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's also a big hail mary because if you drop
Yeah.
it and you're not get, you might not get the chance to set up hazards. You might not get the chance to
Yeah,
set up
you're
ults.
basically going for broke once.
Absolutely, yeah,
Um so with his offense speed, I think 8.5 was pretty good. I do think
totally.
uh it could be a little less because he could have webs, but it could be a little bit because he doesn't have webs, but it could be a little bit more if he did have webs. Um but with his defense, I scored it a 7.5. Um, I mean, it's a little bit above average, uh, maybe a little bit high, but I still think 7.5 is. I think it's very good for his team because Runerigas and Miltank kind of form a little core with themselves, both covering each other really well. Miltank obviously being Ghost and Runerigas being fighting. I think they're going to be really annoying together if a team doesn't have the proper coverage for both.
Yeah, that's
I
fair.
Yeah, that's absolutely a fair criticism. It is kind of interesting. The Reneragus gets such a spotlight on this team just because it is kind of going to be, I think, the defensive linchpin for him.
Yeah,
That it almost makes the Savali Ghost feel like it falls a little bit to the wayside. And to me, the Savali on his team reads a lot more like it's supposed to be an offensive threat than a support threat, like what a lot of people draft it for.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah,
Because
that's a fair assessment.
having that bulky ghost type on the other end of the spectrum with the Runeragus, while also having your more mixed ghost type in the form of Savali, the ultimate mixed attacker, obviously,
Yeah.
aside from the pixies, um, makes the more supporty options on that mixed threat feel a little bit more awkward, perhaps, just because if you're thinking, oh, I'm dedicating my ghost type to support, why have Savali do that job when Runeragus could be doing it better? And I think ultimately that is kind of an awkward point on the team, which is that his big like Frostmoth and Savali both seem on this team like they want to do the double duty of being support and offense because he
Yeah.
doesn't really have any other reliable ways to get rid of his hazards. And so having that tied into what are otherwise offensive Pokemon could be a bit of a sticking point for him.
Yeah.
Yeah, both of them much rather be saying Frost must much rather be setting up a Quiver Dance or doing something else. Savali
Absolutely.
Ghost much rather be just dealing damage or setting up a Sword Stance if possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Or
I would have expected the Savali. See, I think originally, if you guys were in the draft at the time, he was going for Savali Fairy. And I think that would have definitely fit better on his team. But I think
I agree.
what Savali on this team should be doing is pivoting. Um,
Yes.
setting off parting shots since I don't think anybody drafted a magic bounce user. Even though the magic bounce, he still gets the switch, but he doesn't get the proc.
Base attack.
Yeah. With nobody drafting magic bouncers, I think the parting shot again is going to be really useful for these quiver dancers and the speed booster on his team. The problem is his Sovali is the same dang type as
Yeah.
Runerigus. So, um, bringing both Runerigus and Sovali Ghost, that puts a huge amount of weight on Miltank to stay alive and whatever those ghost attackers have in their.
And even then, they might not even bring Ghost. They might bring Dark types.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And knowing that because like if you have drafted a Savali, it's because you were just looking for that like type linchpin kind of at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the day to make to smooth out your typing curves.
Yeah.
And you can absolutely just stare at this team and see exactly where Savali fits on it.
Yeah.
Savali Fairy, excuse me, fits on it,
Yeah.
and why not drafting that is such a big deal. And you wonder what other mon could possibly fit that niche instead of like your dark resist and having your fairy in there because the lack of a dark resist, I think, is going to end up being a problem for him.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Actually, a lot of his mons actually kind of have overlapping weaknesses. Like I
Mm-hmm.
checked out a whole bunch of where his weaknesses are. He has three Pokemon weak to fire, three Pokemon double weak to weak to flying. A lot of Pokemon weak to ground and psychic. He has three mons weak to ground right there. That's not a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and only one ground resist.
Two doesn't he? He's got Blossom and but who else?
I don't think I don't think ground.
Renarius doesn't resist.
Yeah.
No. Could have sworn someone else. Like
Frostmoth.
Frostmoth. Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah.
Frostmoth's gonna take a hit.
You forget that Bug has resistances.
I think Frostmoth has less than 70 base defense though.
To be fair, if you're
60.
or you're a bug type in general, you don't want to be taking hits.
Yeah, exactly.
And you are scared of the situation where, like, oh yeah, my Frostmoth can come in and tank a ground type, but how many Pokemon are going to follow up a ground type attack with a rock type attack? I think that number is quite high.
Yeah.
Yeah. The move overlap there is a lot.
Yeah.
I love Frostmoth on this team. I think the Frostmoth is a great pick on this team. I just think you need a little bit more to augment it.
I think it's a hot pick, and I think that I would like to see it do well. How I feel about it.
Same.
I mean, we put so much spotlight on Miltank and Rodriguez, but
the two most important Pokemon.
Oh, 100%, 100%.
Barring the captain, of course.
I think if there isn't a psychic type or a ground type or abundant amount of them, I think Muck is going to do really well as well.
Absolutely.
With Poison Touch, it's going to be an extremely annoying Pokemon if Chris is getting intelligent switches and there is an abundance of Earthquake or Psychics going around. I think Muck's going to be extremely annoying.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Also, quick question, guys.
Mm-hmm.
The Shield Draft, just because I have not looked at.
Yep.
Is Silvally Dark taken?
I don't believe so.
I don't think.
I would say that'd be a better choice than Ghost would be, just because looking at right here, that would solve a lot of the overlap problems for an Aerogus, and it helps get the psychic like immunity in case you need to switch out from Muck.
Yeah. The only issue is then what happens is he starts running into like the thing that you pointed out, more double weaknesses for the team. Miltank and Silvally no longer can pivot into each other, both weak to fighting. But I do think, I do think the Dark would be better than the Ghost.
It does run into the fighting problem because you are picking up a fighting weakness.
I know, that fighting weakness.
Yeah.
There's already the Miltank and the Magneton having a bit of a weakness.
Yeah.
Renargus is obviously a very reliable check or counter even to most fighting types, so it's not like you're completely dead in the water if you're up against a good offensive fighting type.
Mm-hmm.
But it'll make that job a little bit harder.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, Chris drafted quite a high skill cap team. Not one that I think will preclude him from winning, just one that I think is going to really reward his creativity.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to take more than just one good trade.
Oh, for sure.
To fix that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Next we talked about his speed quite a bit already, but
we did, yeah.
I don't think we need to go over it too much more. We've pretty capped on that one, but we did score it a 5.
To avoid.
Yeah.
It's pretty clearly the first thing that jumps out.
It's definitely the
first thing that stuck out to me.
Yeah, it's definitely glaring. But I did rate the hazards an 8. This is heavily on Runerigus being able to do a lot of things with hazards, with toxic spikes. Go ahead.
The hazard Runerigus is missing is spikes itself.
Regular spikes.
Yeah.
And webs.
Yeah.
So it's really good, and you've got Miltank as the other rock setter, which is also really good.
Super reliable.
You could run, say, Toxic Spikes on Runerigus and then run Stealth Rocks on Miltank.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could focus the rolls on Runerigus. Honestly, it's...
Yeah, you could free up move slots for either of them.
Yeah.
And Runerigus... Sorry, go ahead, Sean.
Does hazards include removing the hazards?
Yes.
That's the same point, yeah.
Yeah, so the hazards is an 8, which is high, but that's only because I think Runerigus and Miltank are very reliable hazard setters. Miltank being the most reliable, I think. But what brings his hazards down is definitely the fact that Frostmoth being ×4 to Stealth Rock, and Silvally being the only other defogger besides Frostmoth.
I think it's going to be
I
taken
think
on
you could even put the hazard score lower just because one of his defoggers is times 4 to the rock, which was probably going to force him to run heavy duty boots 90% of the time.
I don't expect Frostmoth to come to a battle without heavy duty boots, or if he
yeah,
does, then you're going to be seeing a lot of Savali coming in.
Yeah,
permanently rocking those Tims, never taking them off.
yeah, exactly. I mean, aside from that though, that's basically all he's really got for hazards. Pretty basic, nothing too tricky about it. You're definitely gonna on Miltank or Runerigus or both. Um,
I I will say, while I did somewhat poo poo the double ghost, it does do wonders when you're in a situation where you yourself aren't coming in with a lot of reliable hazard removal
mhm,
that you can supply on your own. Being able to force defog because you have two ghosts to counter the rapid spin constantly,
yeah,
and have your opponent kind of do your job for you,
mhm.
could end up being pretty invaluable if he decides to hold on to the double ghost. I wouldn't necessarily do it, but I think that there is a case to be made for doing it just for that case if he's not going to be focusing on getting more reliable hazard removal.
Absolutely. I mean, it totally comes down to how Chris is going to play this too. I mean, uh, there's quite a bit of fighting in this draft, like fighting Pokemon and fighting moves. So I don't see the double ghost, super bad. I don't even find it like bad. I just find it um, redundant. I guess is the word I would use.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like you guys have been saying, he could have something in there that would do the same thing as Silvally, but not share a weakness. Um, but for the momentum, I rated a 7.5. This is heavily, I almost want to say only based on snowball momentum. If Bellossom, Combuskin, or Frostmoth get a free switch or get a good switch and they get set up and there's nothing to really cover them, uh, he's just gonna pull the win from that.
Yeah, I could agree to that. I mean, we've seen no shortage of crazy sweeps get pulled off just from like one turn miracles. That's the
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing that'll happen every once in a while. And I think when you have a team as volatile as I think Chris's is, where it is so prone
Yeah,
to getting those sweeps off, I think you're going to see very binary games out of Chris, where you're going to see either he's going to do really really well and come out of it with a very high differential win, or the exact opposite, and
yeah,
he's going to end up somewhere even just based on a lot of like pretty resounding wins and potentially pretty resounding losses.
yeah.
That's where it all comes down. The momentum all comes down to either Chris's gameplay or his opponent's gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
His opponent going to let him set up even for a second? And can Chris take advantage or create those openings where he has to set up?
Absolutely.
That's going to be the deciding factor where this momentum will either be great or terrible.
Which we should mention is sort of the standard case for getting momentum in Pokemon. We just think that Chris's team is going to be especially rewarded for identifying those opportunities, maybe more so than some other teams that have a little bit better column insurance policies than he does.
Right.
Yeah,
Like you're saying, I mean, this is a very high skill cap team. Um, if Chris can recognize those weaknesses, those win cons, and ways to get rid of those checks that are going to stop Frostmoth, Combuskin, or Bellossom, I think, like you said, Chris is going to have a very snowball type win. If he can't, he's going to have a really hard time, and probably it's going to be he's going to get snowballed on. So overall, I think 36 and a half is not bad by any means. I mean,
Oh, definitely.
the maximum score is 50, but I do think that his team either needs some trades that might help those quiver dancers or Buskin set up more efficiently, or some type of wish support. I think would also be good as well, just to allow those things to come in safely.
especially the ones that are heavily on defense, like how much Renarigus and Silvally are going to be pulling, especially Miltank too.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so what are you guys' final thoughts on Chris' team? Like, what do you think that would benefit his team, or what do you think you're going to see out of Chris in the draft?
So before we like really really wrap up, I do just want to pose the question to you guys:
Mm-hmm.
Is it a problem that we have spent the majority of this discussion talking about Runarigus and Miltank, two Pokemon that are not his captain, as the true linchpins of his team.
I think that is it is something when I was writing in the notes that I kind of skimmed over Regidrago a lot. I did write down that it's an absolute cannon, but the problem is with Regidrago, it's one dimensional.
Definitely.
There's not.
One job, it does it very well, but
Yeah,
it's one job.
exactly. So I think what's going to happen though is if Chris comes against the fairy, Regidrago is going to be very, very. His use is going to go down dramatically. And I think that's why we probably didn't talk about Regidrago too much.
Mm-hmm.
Despite it being a dragon, it really doesn't have a lot that it can do except, glass cannon.
I think Regidrago, the lack of versatility is something that'll hold it back somewhat.
Mm-hmm.
But just looking at, I think overall the dragon type is obviously still quite a good type
Oh
because
yeah,
you counter. But in a lower tier draft, I think that as you go lower and lower, the dragon type becomes stronger and stronger just
right,
by virtue of berries getting weaker.
right.
And so I think even with the lack of versatility, Regidrago is such a well statted Pokemon for what it wants to do
Mm-hmm.
that I could see even that lack of versatility being overshadowed brute force, which I don't think makes for a bad captain. I just think it's a different approach. It's not necessarily one that I would look to. I value versatility a lot,
Mm-hmm.
but man, you can't. You just look at the stats of these things of this thing and absolutely see the case for it being a pretty good commander. I think
Yeah, that's fair. It's got a lot of HP, so it can
it does.
guarantee to live one hit, maybe two, depending on the attacker.
Yeah.
Its defenses aren't great, but it's like I said, it's gonna live that one hit
Yeah.
probably, and that's really all it needs to do to take out a threat, maybe two. As a
So
captain,
go
like I
ahead.
said, I'd like to be a little more versatile, but
Mm-hmm.
because you're bringing it to every game, but if it's doing the same thing every game and it's working, it's not really a problem.
Yeah. So this is my thing with the Regidrago. I think it would have been really good with webs or wish support. Uh, why? So that it can continue to do what it does, and that's punch holes in teams. Um, and it all comes down to can Chris get it in safely, and um, a number of times to break down a team so that those sweepers on his team can do what they want to do. Right. That's how I feel about the Reggie.
Well, its speed tier is what, 80?
80. Yeah,
Perfectly average.
And it gets that Dragon Dance. So again,
that's true.
it's possibly a Sap Sweeper, which is well, we've talked about the Sap Sweepers on his team quite a lot.
Yeah,
If he can get it up, if he has the opportunity, it can be really good. But the problem is, if he's not using it to set up, he's just using it to punch a hole and then get back. It's
yeah,
iffy.
yeah. And that's basically how I feel about it. And I think that's why we didn't talk about it so much, is because we know what it's gonna do. We know what it's gonna want to do. It's just about how is Chris gonna do that, right? And I think that.
Perfect symbol for his team, actually.
Pardon me.
Kind of a perfect symbol for his team, actually. We know what a lot of them want.
Yeah,
How is Chris gonna get that to happen?
that's a really interesting insight. Actually, it does really suit his team as the captain. The Regidrago's like, all right, boys, I'm the captain of sweeping. All right.
Here's what we're gonna do, and here's how we're gonna do it.
Yeah, yeah, basically. Overall, I think you guys, Chris is gonna, um, he's gonna surprise us with some really interesting sets. I mean, I hope he does. Like we said, this is a high skill cap team. I think it's gonna test Chris really heavily. So I'm pretty excited to see some.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I think you're going to find that Chris's games are going to be some of the most exciting in the league this year, just because he does have not only the tools but the necessity, as we said before, to be really creative with the way
Mm-hmm.
that he uses this team, and I think it's going to make for some really exciting games. I absolutely think he has what it takes to pull it off.
100%.
Oh, definitely. As long as he doesn't get too comfortable with one team or two teams, then
Yeah,
yeah, definitely. As long as he keeps on reinventing his team for every week.
yeah, I agree. Well, I think that wraps up Chris's team a little bit. I know we spent a lot of time on the Miltank, Rodriguez, and the Quiver Dancers, but I do think those are pivotal points to his team. I hope.
That's okay. We're not going to talk about Miltic again this video, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's true. We'll save Miltank for another video. All right, guys. I'll see you on the next one.